Hey there. Some years back, I made a post online about writing. I've decided to update it and turn it into a video, but also editing videos sucks, so I'm just going to put gameplay footage in the background. Some of it's about me and some of it's about writing, and most of it will be about how to improve at all skill levels of writing. Let's get right into it. So, learning to write. How do you start? This comes up less than you'd assume, but I think it's really important. I'm going to be unambiguous about this. The best way to learn how to write is to read. A bunch of people consider me a good writer, and you want to know how I got good at this? Was it classes, after school learning, my own projects, university? No. It was reading, and nothing but reading. During my childhood, I read an absolute ton of books. My mom would drop me off at the library on a fairly regular basis, so she could go do whatever it is adults do, and I chewed through the entire children's section and began moving to stuff older kids were reading. By the time I was 11 or so, I was reading at the level of college students, and by the time I was 13, I was writing those college students' papers for them. Okay, that last bit is totally untrue, I just wanted to say that. What actually happened is that a first year college student I knew online asked me to proofread his papers because I was good at picking errors out. Obviously, if you're listening to this, it's hopefully too late to replicate a childhood spent reading books. But what you can do is start now. Go read some David Eddings or something. Buy some books off Amazon. They don't even have to be niche. Read the Dark Tower series, read Game of Thrones, read the Kingkiller Chronicles, read Wheel of Time. They don't have to be literary mainstream. You can read stuff from TikTok like Fourth Wing. They don't even have to be fantasy. Read some classics. You probably got these shoved down your throat in high school, but Catcher in the Rye, 1984, Fahrenheit 451, Brave New World, Oryx and Crake. And I want to stress this, you don't need to read them with a critical eye, looking at sentence structure or what color the curtains represents. You just need to read. Expand your vocabulary. It is your primary weapon. How you wield your vocabulary is what makes up your identity as a writer, not just by employing synonyms, but by deliberately engineering situations in order to vary your word choice. If you think a particular word has come up too often in sequential paragraphs, don't just replace it with a lazy synonym. Rewrite the entire situation so you can use a different word. Sometimes it only takes a single sentence. Later, when you're thinking about writing something specific, for instance, romance, you will be able to read novels or posts or articles about that specific thing and be better able to contextualize them. Teaching by example remains one of the best things you can do to learn something. That's how I got my start in Smut, too, by reading Corruption of Champions 1. I imagine, and I use the word imagine very literally here because I have no idea, that most people who want to become a writer do things like take English classes and major in it in university. I did not do these things, and I cannot advise you as to whether or not they are useful. As is often the case with native speakers and writers of English, 95% of my writing was pure instinct, while the remaining 5% was save and bop me over the head with grammatical rules. So paradoxically, I'm going to tell you here, emulating me might suck if you want to become a writer. I'm not going to pretend I have taken the best, the most efficient, or even a good pathway to becoming what I am. All I can tell you is that it is a pathway to becoming a writer and nothing more. So a bit about me. I'll keep this really short in the hopes it doesn't look like I wrote all of this just to talk about myself. At the time I originally wrote most of this, I was 32 and I am now 36. I never really thought much of writing as a kid, and the extent of my writing prior to the age of 27, which is when I started to write professionally, is as follows. I wrote for the compulsory creative writing days in intermediate and high school. I once submitted a terrible story in the setting of Diablo 2 to a Diablo 2 site when I was a child. And shout out to the guy who gave me feedback on it. I don't remember any of it, but the fact anyone even responded to some 11-year-old kid's terrible writing is really a testament to his faith. I literally started it with, "It was a dark and stormy night." I roleplayed racing on a forum about arcade racing when I was like 12. I wrote a story for my "you dropped out of high school and didn't get your university entrance qualifications" year-long university course. This one was a bit more important to me than the others because we had to read them out in front of the class, and I hammed it up a bit and everyone loved it. I think this was the first time it had ever occurred to me that, like, oh, writing is fun and I guess I'm okay at it. And that's it, that's everything I'd ever written. So yeah, almost nothing really. The moment of truth came for me when I was 27 years old, having freshly failed out of university for the second time, first biology and then computer science. I sat there thinking, Jesus Christ, is there anything I am good at? Do I have one single marketable skill? Then I thought about writing. It started very ignobly. With a Tumblr account I published some writing porn on. I then emailed it directly to Phenoxo like, "Hey, is this any good? Can I write for your game?" And he said yes. Skipping details and jumping ahead, I made my very first project in Trials in Tainted Space. Edon, the Lathan. The rest is history. No, seriously, that was like 8 years ago. Time flies. Thanks to Wsan, but when do I learn how to actually write instead of listening to you waffle on about your beginnings and how to read? Right now. Picking a project. Alright, I'm going to skip all the boring stuff like writing a transformative or something to get your feet wet, and just assume you're at the point where you want to write something sexy. And if you think transformation is sexy, then allow me to assure you that writing one is not. Where do you begin? It's actually really easy. Write whatever makes you hot. You were probably going to do that anyway, but I'm going to expand upon it. It's important to do this because chances are you are going to give up on this. That is not because you are shit, it is because that is normal. It is the people who continue to write that are abnormal. What drives them? One word: lust. It's a really simple and effective motivator. It's obvious, but if there's thinking about a project you think is sexy is going to be more finishable than one you think is not sexy. Writing a sex scene you're not interested in is the equivalent of scraping your nails across a very long and very loud chalkboard. It's unpleasant and you hope it's over soon, but it never seems to end, and whenever you check the word count, it seems like you've written less than you did the preceding hour. It sucks. So if your first project is some hyper-specific concept like a dick girl that has 3 different deep throat scenes, or a Tor only interested in other Tors, or a furry wolfman only interested in being rimmed, then yeah, fucking go for it. Will anyone like it? I don't know, we'll think about that later. For now, just write it. Strike while the iron is hot. Just don't strike too many times or you have 7 different unfinished projects, and I can just about guarantee you will not finish a single one, let alone all of them. Doing the work. Yes, this part is decidedly unsexy. It is very, very easy to sit there and marinate in whatever fantasy you envision. Sometimes you may even start writing. I have docs that are little more than sentence clusters, some not even that, just singular words outlining some scenario that was 10 times sexier in my head. Unfortunately, jotting some ideas down and going, I'll come back to this later, is not a good idea. And in fact, I don't think I have ever successfully returned to an idea document to fill it out. In every case of successful writing, I have started fresh with the intention to create something I can jam into the game. You will, at some point, have to sit down and stare at Google Docs for hours at a time. Maybe only 1 or 2 if you're really fast. My peak output rate is over 1,000 words an hour when I know exactly what I'm going to write. Most days I will hover around half that, and some days much less. Project burnout and scope creep. This should go without saying, but pick an appropriate project size for your stuff. If you're creating a whole new NPC, restrict yourself to 2 or 3 sex scenes at most. You will very quickly find that scope creep is absolutely insidious and can destroy your idea completely. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Pick an idea and stick with it. I cannot emphasize this enough, and I'm talking partially to myself here. If you want to make it bigger, write an expansion later. Don't decide you need to all in now and suddenly your draft goes from under 5,000 words to over 15,000 words. Keep it simple, stupid. Have you ever heard of the Pareto principle? It states that, for many outcomes, roughly 80% of consequences come from 20% of the causes. Perhaps more relevantly, Wikipedia has this to say about it in relation to computer science. It was also discovered that in general, 80% of a certain piece of software can be written in 20% of the total allocated time. Conversely, the hardest 20% of the code takes 80% of the time. How is that related to us? Well, this might not be universal, but it's definitely true for me. Finishing a project is so much harder than starting it. Those last 300, 500, 1000 words, a final scene, the last NPC in a set of 3. This is the hill you will likely die trying to take. Where it once seemed so easy, now it's beginning to grow dark. You will have to power through this. The last 10% of a project has often screwed me over, leading to me saying things like, oh, I'll have this finished tomorrow, and then I actually hand a finished product in 3 or 5 days later. I try not to give estimates anymore. The only possible way you'll get through a project is by persevering. Sit there and peck at your keyboard like a freaking pigeon until it's done. Making cuts. Might seem weird to give this an entire section, but yeah, this is actually really important. The causes are numerous. Sometimes a project has grown too large, see scope creep. Sometimes you realize you've bitten off more than you can chew. Sometimes you realize that a 20,000 word NPC is inappropriate for a bit part. In the end, what matters is that you're left with a decision. Do I keep going, or do I cut this entire bit out? This is where I am ruthless and selfish. When it comes to committing to a project, I do not think about the audience and how much happier they'll be with a full set of scenes. I think, can I get this done without burning myself out? Because after this project, there will be another project. And if the answer is no, then okay, cut it. How often do I make cuts? Literally all the time. I'll cut variants, scenes, NPCs, whatever. If I can't do it, I won't do it. There are two reasons I do this. One is that I do not have an editor. There is nobody policing my efforts, and this is a double-edged sword. If I am particularly stupid, I can find myself mired in a situation I created with no help. It also means that I have complete creative control with nobody looking over my shoulder, which is literally the best, so I roll with the punches. The second reason is that my job is to write, and that's a complicated thing. If I burn out, that does not mean that I get off the computer and do something else. That means I am now at risk of having to do something I actively don't want to in order to get money day in and day out. So, like everyone else on the fucking planet, I hear you say. But ideally, I don't want that to happen. And the thing is, my boss doesn't either. He would rather I was happy and writing what I enjoy, because why would you burn out one of your writers if you have the choice not to? Chances are, if you're listening to this, it's not your job to write, and that's good, you can step away. But there is something to be learned in the process of persevering, even through that. I'd like to emphasize that actually. A lot of writing is simply learned by repetition. You cannot be a good writer without writing. There are lessons you will pick up just by doing things. This goes for life in general. Appealing to an audience. This one is really going to draw on another part of your knowledge entirely. I'm going to be honest here, I think I'm good at this profession partially because I have read so much porn. In the past, I've read tons of dojins, smut comics, erotic fiction, etc. I think being familiar with what's popular and why is important, as well as the mechanics behind it all, like the psychology of a particular fantasy. So why is that important in comparison to regular reading? Because the vast amount of experience helps me identify market segments and write what they want. This is crucial if you want your audience to actually enjoy your writing, and I'm going to assume that you do if you're paying attention to this. Let's work through this using an example. You want to write a dominant dick girl. Okay, you and every other writer. What kind of dominant dick girl? Think about this carefully because while submissive players are a dime a dozen, there are many, many different types. Some want to be slowly and gently guided to their own submission, others want to be slammed against a wall and used like a rag, others still want a casual, fun experience that could range anywhere in between those two extremes, or they even possibly want one of those two extremes without it being quite so basic, because even in porn there can be nuance. There's literally infinite things you can do with this character, so where do you start? The first thing you will have to do is envision how this character acts. This does not need to be complicated. Literally something like picturing them with an arrogant sneer on their face as they plow someone is all you need. This character thinks she's better than her partners, she's unsubtle about it, and a lot of submissives love that. Great. Now, why does this character act like that? It doesn't need to be complex. Maybe she's an important person. Maybe nobody's ever told her no and she just assumes that she's the shit. Maybe she's confident in her ability to leave you a gaping wreck because she has a 30-inch dick. Whatever it is, give us some kind of reason. It doesn't need to be special. Okay, now the million-dollar question. How does the audience want this woman to treat them? This is a question with trillions of different answers, and it is up to you to pick one. Let's recap real quick. You have a dominant dick girl who treats her partners like rags, and she does it because she believes she's better than them. Okay, here's the trick. At this point, you have filtered out a lot of people. People who don't like dominance. People who don't like dick girls. People who wanted something gentler. People who don't like being subject to an arrogant bitch's whims. And the list goes on. So at this point, you can stop caring about any of those people. They're a lost cause, and you don't need to cater to them, because no matter what you do within this project, they're not going to like it. This is a good thing. Now you're left with enthusiasts of the subject matter, and writing what they want is a great deal easier. They want what this girl is selling, and they want a lot of it. They will come back to this girl repeatedly because she treats them like shit, and they get off on her getting off on it. People who play porn games are often looking for that one character, or even just that one scene. Your niche dick girl could be their true love. So think about how she could cement the relationship between the two of them. Maybe a public setting where she utterly destroys the player character in full view of their friends, or writing Vashka's number one slut across their forehead with a marker. Maybe it's kept between the two of them, but she's privately plowing their face whenever they cross paths, letting them preserve the facade of superiority in public, but smugly putting them in their rightful place in the bedroom. These people that you are writing for are your market segment, and you are trying to deliver unto them an experience they will enjoy. You will go through this process with any character you want to write, but sometimes it can be extremely simple. For instance, you want to write a generic male minotaur. Okay. So right off the bat, there are a lot of people who aren't going to like this. Male characters aren't ever going to be as popular as female ones, and he's a minotaur, which has a few ramifications. The people who are going to like this are, however, simple enough. The list is people who want to get plowed by a minotaur. Wow, that was easy. I wish we could be that non-specific every time. Okay, but let's dig a little deeper. Why is this the case? Well, minotaurs are pretty well established in both COC and just in general fantasy. Everyone knows what they are. Beast-headed men, muscular, covered in fur, hooved legs, whopping cock if it's a porn universe. The likelihood that any given minotaur you meet is going to pound the absolute shit out of you if he can, close to 100%. So, armed with that knowledge, let's talk about audience expectations. When they approach the sexable Minotaur, the player will probably have a few assumptions in mind. The Minotaur will likely have an enormous dick. He will likely want to fuck them rather than the other way around. The sex is likely to be rough and primal. These expectations have actually done your work for you. You can now write your generic Minotaur. If you want to subvert the trope, that's cool too, but look out that you don't either do it for the sake of it, like, wow, a classy Minotaur, how novel. Does he do anything? Or disappoint your aforementioned audience. Because there will be people who just wanted to get absolutely pile-drived by this Minotaur you have now turned into something else, and they will be sad that you didn't let them. Alright, let's move on to some quick tips to instantly improve your writing. Some of them are really basic, but if there's one thing I've learned from Hemingway, it's that the basics really matter. In fact, I'd say the basics matter pretty much more than everything else. If you don't have the fundamentals down, it doesn't matter how descriptive your writing is, it's going to look amateurish. I apologize in advance, but you'll want to look at your screen for some of these. Using commas and full stops correctly in dialogue. Alright, listen close because this is absolutely crucial. I am not going to teach you this like a teacher, just how I know it. You need to listen to this, yes you, dear community writer. I see this in everyone's writing. Everyone. Here is a correct example sentence. Notice the comma after the I suppose. If your character hasn't finished the sentence or the text hasn't mentioned the actual action of speaking yet, which in this case is Brienne says, use a comma for the first set of speech marks. The exceptions are when the character does the action first. In this case, since there isn't going to be a follow-up piece of dialogue and the action has already been mentioned, you use a full stop. Or the character talks, does an action, and then finishes the sentence. A full stop also goes at the very end of the speech, i.e., the part where she says, "You joker," and then nothing comes after it. Honestly, if you can't figure it out, like you're in a situation where you don't know which one is appropriate, just use a full stop if it's the very end of the sentence, and if it isn't, just use a comma. I told you these would be quick and dirty. Also, put line breaks in between separate instances of dialogue, like two characters speaking to each other. Stop using you. This one shows up in a lot of writing all the way from beginner level to intermediate. Let's be clear, the game is about you. Do not fall into the trap of interpreting that to mean that your every action should be narrated in a paragraph. This can be very innocuous to a writer, so let me give you an example. There are actually two problems with this writing. One is that every sentence started with the word you, and the other is that every sentence took the form of something something, comma, something something. Let's talk about the first problem here and then the second problem later. Now, is this bad writing? Truth be told, your audience probably won't even notice. Standards are not high in the porn community, and the readers usually have something else on their mind. But if you want to actually improve, take heed and make some differences. Instead of prefacing everything with you, you can just change it to the actual action and put the you later. That was such a simple, basic change that it is almost completely meaningless, and yet it reads and flows so much better. I changed all of 3 words there, and I didn't even bother with the start of the last sentence, which I probably would if I wasn't doing this to illustrate a point, but I don't have to. It's fine as it is. Additionally, stop doing she, or he. Break it up with actions or the player's own response. Even something like she, you, she is better. Don't go thinking you have to write a descriptive novel instead, you don't. Use paragraph breaks. Real plain this one. If you've written 3 or 4 sentences, paragraph break. That's pressing enter twice for those of you who don't know. Leave an empty space between the paragraphs. Also applies if you write 2 really long sentences. It might not look like much in Google Docs, but slam it in game and your 5 to 6 sentences is just a block of impenetrable text. And it's ugly. In a game with a scroll bar for text, it can get real shit real fast to have to wind your mouse wheel up and down to find where stuff begins. Dialogue can also make this really messy if you don't put a break between the lines of 2 characters. Basic stuff here. Vary sentence structure. Perhaps the most basic instruction there is. You might have been told this by a teacher when you were like 10 years old. Let's take another look at that example from above. Like I mentioned earlier, every single sentence here takes the same form of something something, comma, something something. Is that necessarily bad? No. And again, your audience probably won't even notice or care. But if you really knew how little the audience cared, you wouldn't be listening to this, you'd be writing your own game. Let's reword the paragraph a bit. Does that read better? I don't know, does it? We're getting pretty close to jerking ourselves off here with relation to literary achievement, but I think this kind of thing is important. At the risk of pretentiousness, the basics are an art, and art is open to interpretation. I could rewrite this paragraph 50 times, and the result is going to be different every time, but I maintain that varying a sentence's length and structure is important. Don't use adverbs. You may have heard this one before because a famous person said it and because it's drummed into every writer's head, and for good reason. Adverbs usually weaken your writing. There is a lot of good writing you can do without an adverb. Here's an exercise for you. Cut as many adverbs out of your writing as you possibly can. You're allowed to start using them again when you think you've improved to the point you can wield them properly. When is that? I don't know. You're going to get as much out of this as you put in. Don't listen to feature requests unless you've got a good reason. If you're a community writer, chances are you're going to post your project on the forum or on the Discord, whereupon they will be perceived by the users. There are good odds that at least one of them is going to say something like, "Does she do X thing? This is awesome, and I don't mean to be rude, but will there be pregnancy content? Will he cater to males? Is a submissive path planned?" In these cases, it can be your solemn duty to inform them, "No, but I'll do it in an expansion," and then make your escape, your promise falling by the wayside. Seriously though, go re-listen to the part about project burnout and scope creep. This is hands down the easiest way to kill your fun of writing, doing what other people want instead of what you want. Read this book. Go read the actual book entitled On Writing by Stephen King. I don't care what you think about him as an author or whether you like his material. This is possibly the best book ever written about the art of writing. The next best thing you're going to get is attending a lecture taught by Brandon Sanderson at BYU. Actually, there's an idea. Look up Brandon Sanderson lecture on YouTube. The 2020 ones are up there. Are you sending me to YouTube University to learn how to write? Yes. Alright, those are all the tips I've got for you. Let's wrap this up by taking a look at my process. How do I write? To be absolutely clear, every single writer is an anomaly. Creative pursuits are one of the very few situations in life where do your own thing is truly the best advice. There's no one best way to do it because the way your mind works is not going to be the way my mind works because we've lived different lives and we have unique experiences. Find what works for you. Anyway, how I write goes like this. I go through all of the character design stuff I laid out earlier in the picking a project section. Who am I writing? Why am I writing them? Where am I putting them? This part usually comes last. When I wrote for Trials in Tainted Space, this was usually pretty easy because planets tend to be extremely diverse and transformation is so canon that putting almost any kind of character in there will happen without a hitch. In COC2, it's less so, and I have to put actual thought into where this character is going to come from because the universe is a little tighter. There can only be so many wandering mercenaries from completely different continents chilling on Hawkthorn's doorstep. Once I've decided who my character is, I need to think about how they meet the PC. Are they an enemy? Is it a fight? Is it a friendly NPC? Are they hanging out in a bar or on a town tile? Then the nature of the meeting. If they're friendly, is the character horny enough to come right out and say, "Hey, I want to have sex with you"? Is it going to take some cajoling? What is their primary interest upon meeting the PC? Upon deciding these, I immediately start thinking of what sex scenes the character will offer. If they're really horny and pent up and have a dick, offering something like a passionate blowjob or rough vaginal is appropriate. If they lack a penis, then doggy styling them might be good. This then leads through to later content. Let's say the PC re-meets this character somewhere else later, or just on repeat visits. Now what do? Are they still horny or are they a little more relaxed now? Has there been progression? Maybe this time you can offer more scenes now that the characters know each other a little better. There's more room in the creative space now. From there, it's the hard bit, actually writing it. Meetings, talks if applicable, sex scenes, leaving scenes. If the character is meant to give some detail about a quest or something, it should beat you over the head with it, no joke. Readers will miss important things and then get fucked over if you don't spell it out for them by saying something like, "You can find character at the Wild Stallion bar to begin the quest," in bold font. After I've written it, I submit it. The actual way I write is completely and utterly disjointed. In an ideal world, I think I'd do everything from top to bottom in one even flow, but often the case is that I think up some idea like, oh, I want to make a dick girl that slowly breaks you in. And I write the breaking in scenes first, because that's the hot part. And then I go back and I go, I need to write the beginning in a way that will link up with the middle. And in the worst case, I have to cut or adjust what I've written because I'm an idiot that hates planning. But in my defense, that happens very rarely. I know for a fact other writers take a more structured approach, laying out a skeleton of scenes, dialogue, etc., so they can take a good look at the entire thing in an organized fashion. This sounds smart to me, and I have never done it. I told you not to emulate me, and hopefully you've listened. It works for me, maybe not for you. Again, every writer is individual. Do what you like and make sure you enjoy it, because otherwise there's no point in the first place. It's like working out. Yeah, it makes me more muscular, but I do it because it's fun. If it wasn't, a person as lazy as me would never even bother in the first place. All right, the notes section. I wanted to have a section to address some things I want to talk about, but aren't necessarily directly related to the subject of writing, but also don't merit their own videos. The first is talent and hard work. This is the internet's favorite argument. One thing about talent is that the older you get, the more value hard work has. When you're like 5, 10, 15, being talented is a really big deal. You might be more competent at any given thing than a 20-year-old, and you're going to blow your peers out of the water. You may be literally years ahead of them, which has several consequences I won't bother getting into here. But as time goes on, two things start working against you. One is expertise. You might be able to outdo a first year university student at some task, but can you outdo someone who's graduated and has been working in the field for a year now? Oh, you can? Okay. How about someone who's been working in the field for 5 years? And if you think that would be easy, you're demonstrating your own ignorance of how the world works. The second is simple filtering. The older you get, the more competent people around you will be at their chosen professions, because the less competent people don't stick around. And I know this is inviting jokes from people who work in an office, and I know there are edge cases like knowledge obsolescence, but I think it's pretty reasonable to say that on average, people get better at things they do over time. A craftsman is going to improve on his work year after year. It's just how the world works. What this means is that when you're 15, your talent might make you exceptional. When you're 25, your talent might give you a leg up, and when you're 35, you had better have put some work in at some point because by now you are not even meeting baseline requirements if all you have to go on is your talent. At some point in your life, you're going to have to put in the hard work. Otherwise, you're going to be 40 years old and telling stories about how your team could have won the high school match if your culture just put you in off the bench. The end result is that it doesn't actually matter if you're talented or not. Every single person has to put hard work in. You think Lionel Messi, the greatest footballer of all time, coasted on his talent? Don't use feeling untalented as an excuse not to put work in, no matter what your discipline is. I guarantee that you will later come to regret it. The most valuable type of hard work is the hard work you've already done that informs your future decisions, but the next most valuable type of hard work is the hard work you do today. I think a life spent without ever having put all of yourself into something is a tragedy, whether it's work, sport, a hobby, raising a family, learning, whatever. Do something. The only person it has to be meaningful to is you. Alright, next note. Reading critically. How often should you read critically, thoroughly analyzing a text? Well, I don't know the answer to that. What I can tell you instead is how often I read critically, which is never. Not deliberately anyway. As you gain more reading experience and reading knowledge, and maybe even read the views of other people about things in books, you automatically analyze things like, why does this character act this way? Sometimes it won't be spelled out in the text. There won't be a character saying, oh yeah, Johnny's a bastard because his dad treated him awfully as a kid. Instead, you'll have to infer that from the times Johnny visits his family home in the text, or maybe from conversations Johnny has about parents, or maybe from Johnny's own thoughts. It's one part's reading, one part's empathy, or whatever you want to call the ability to imagine yourself in another's place. I think it's possible you might need to train the skill to recognize that it exists, but just acknowledging its existence might be just as good. It's just that it pays to sit back and think about things every once in a while. Alright, that's all I've got for you. Hopefully at least some of it was useful, and if not, then hopefully this was a solid sleeping aid. I know I don't put out videos very often, but I might do a couple more game reviews soon. I've been playing Rogue Trader, which is by the same guys that did Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, and I'm loving it. We'll see. Until next time, have a good one.